We all feel it sometimes, right? That wave of negative emotions, the overwhelm.
Yeah, that feeling that maybe our moods are running the show instead of, well, the other way around.
Exactly. And there's this real desire to understand why we feel what we feel, and maybe if there's a way to get some control back.
It's such a fundamental human thing, isn't it? Navigating this inner world. Sometimes it does feel like you're just lost at sea reacting.
Totally. And that's precisely what we're diving into today on Bookish Dives. Welcome back for another deep dive. This isn't our first, hopefully not our last,
Definitely not.
exploring the fascinating ideas from the books you bring us. So for this one, you shared excerpts from Master Your Emotions by Thibaut Meurisse.
Right, and he frames it as a guide, really, for anyone who struggles with negative emotions, wants to get how they work, and maybe even use them as a tool for personal growth.
Yeah, the book's purpose sounds pretty ambitious, helping people use their emotional landscape, to their advantage, taking charge of the internal world.
It kicks off with a really powerful idea, too. It uses that quote, often linked to John Milton. The mind in its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven.
That quote just instantly sets the stage, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That our internal state, how we interpret things, might be way more powerful than what's actually happening outside us.
That's definitely the core thread running through all the material you've given us, yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission here in this deep dive, it's not just to summarize. We want to pull out the most impactful insights from these bits of the book.
The core idea is the practical stuff, right? Things that can actually help us navigate our own emotional experiences.
Exactly. I'm genuinely excited to get into this. It feels so fundamental to being human. So where does Meurisse start? How do we begin understanding this wiring?
Well, he starts pretty basic. What are emotions? And what's their purpose, like from an evolutionary perspective?
Okay.
And the book really grounds it in our evolution. Our brains, fundamentally, they're wired for survival.
Right, avoiding threats, staying alive long enough to pass on genes.
Precisely. Every organism before us had to be really, really good at spotting danger. And this creates a kind of built-in bias towards negativity.
A bias towards negativity.
Yeah.
That feels incredibly real, doesn't it? Why is that still so strong when, most of us aren't dodging predators daily?
Well, the brain's still running that old software, basically. Yeah. It's always scanning for threats, real or just perceived. And this wiring helps explain why something like rejection, which, let's face it, rarely threatens our actual survival today, can still feel so intensely painful. It triggers a huge emotional reaction.
The author's example of the writer getting that one-star review.
Exactly.
And it just wipes out the feeling from hundreds of five-star ones.
Yeah.
The brain sees that criticism, that potential social rejection, as a massive threat, even when it's, well, not really.
Totally disproportionate reaction, yeah. And this tendency, this threat perception, it can lead us to over-dramatize things, too.
Like the workplace criticism example.
Right. A bit of feedback suddenly spirals into, what if I get fired? What if my spouse leaves? What about the kids? The book really emphasizes that, okay, we have the survival mechanism, but we also have a responsibility now.
To figure out what's a real threat versus what's just our mind creating drama.
Exactly. Separating real danger from the mental theater. That's a key point.
Makes sense. What else is going on chemically? Dopamine gets mentioned, right?
Yeah, dopamine is highlighted as a huge player, crucial neurotransmitter. It rewards behaviors needed for survival seeking, food, reproduction,
Without that reward, the species probably wouldn't have bothered.
Pretty much. But the book points out the problem now.
Because that reward system is getting triggered artificially.
Yes, exactly. By things that weren't around way back when. Social media pings, gambling, porn, they all give these quick dopamine hits. And the book links this straight to addiction. The brain just keeps chasing that reward.
The Tulane University study sounds pretty stark. People hitting the pleasure center button 40 times a minute. Choosing it over food.
It really shows the raw power of that drive when it's, directly stimulated. And that tragic story of Lee Sung-soop.
The gamer who died after 58 hours.
Yeah. It just underscores the potential severe consequences. The book really stresses these isolated dopamine hits. They are not the same as real, lasting happiness. Understanding how the system gets hijacked is key to getting more emotional control.
So chasing those quick fixes isn't the answer. And that ties into another idea that the book tackles, that one day I will myth.
Oh, yeah, the idea that, if I just get that promotion or when I retire, then I'll finally be happy forever.
That sounds so logical, but
But it crashes into this thing called hedonic adaptation. It's our mind's tendency to just, return to a baseline level of happiness pretty quickly after big events, good or bad. We adapt.
that 1978 study comparing lottery winners and people who became paraplegics is just,
Right.
wow, so counterintuitive.
Isn't it? A year later, despite massively different circumstances, their reported happiness levels were roughly back to where they started.
It powerfully shows how much less long-term impact external stuff has than we think, which lines up with Sanjalu Vamirsky's research mentioned in the book.
Right, suggesting only about 10% of our happiness is actually determined by external factors, marriage, money, job.
Only 10%. Wow. So the rest is 50% genetics, 40% internal stuff.
Exactly, which really hammers home the book's main theme. Your attitude, your interpretation, your internal landscape, that matters way more than what actually happens to you.
Okay, so understanding that wiring the negativity bias, the dopamine system, hedonic adaptation, that's step one.
It's presented as the essential foundation, yeah.
Yeah.
Before you can change things, you need to see how they're currently working.
Right. But then the book introduces another major internal player shaping our emotions, the ego.
Yes, the ego. And it's defined pretty broadly here, not just arrogance. It's like the self-identity we build up through thoughts, interpretations, the stories we tell ourselves.
A mind-created identity, it calls it. Not really concrete, just a story, our identity.
Exactly. And this ego, this story, it needs things to identify with, to feel solid, to feel real.
Like what sort of things?
Well, physical items, for one, which helps explain consumerism, right? Marketing often sells a story, an emotion linked to a product.
Makes sense. What else?
Your body deriving self-worth from how you look. Your friends, colleagues needing their approval. Wanting your parents to be proud, your boss to respect you.
The soccer parent example really hits home there. Living through the kid's success. That's ego identification in relationships.
Totally. And maybe the most powerful one, our beliefs. Religious, political, whatever. When those get challenged, it feels like a direct attack on us, on our identity.
Which leads to getting super defensive. The book mentions the strong reactions around the Trump election as an example of that kind of deep emotional identification.
Yeah. And the characteristics the book lists for the ego really clarify its impact. It equates having with being, lives through comparison.
Never satisfied.
Right. Always wanting more or different. And its self-worth depends so much on how others see it or how it thinks others see it.
And this fuels a constant need for superiority.
Seems so. The book lists ways it does this. Name-dropping, gossiping to feel superior, superiority complexes swinging back and forth, seeking fame, needing to be right.
That needing to be right one. The book suggests everyone thinks they're right, from their own perspective. Even figures like Hitler and Mandela.
It just shows how powerful that internal drive is, yeah. And the impact of all this ego, this story on our emotions. Profound, according to the book. Strong identification with things, people, ideas. That's seen as the root of so many negative emotions.
So if life doesn't match the ego's story, or our beliefs get questioned, we suffer. Upset, anger, defensiveness.
Exactly. The emotions in this view are based on that personal story, that ego-filtered perception. Change the story, reduce the attachment.
And you change the emotional experience.
That's the core argument. And crucially, if you're unaware of this ego operating, you're basically enslaved by it. Self-awareness, seeing it happen, is the first step to freedom.
Okay, so suffering is tied to interpretation, to the ego's story. This leads to an important point the book makes about negative emotions themselves.
Right. It's quite clear they aren't inherently bad.
They're described as temporary, like clothes you wear.
Yeah.
Feeling sad or down doesn't make you a lesser person. They're just states passing through.
Exactly. So if the emotions themselves aren't the core problem, where does the actual suffering come from?
It comes from our interpretation, right? And engaging in blaming others, ourselves, the situation.
Precisely. The author gives that powerful personal example, experiencing totally different feelings, excited versus depressed, under the exact same external circumstances.
Just based on his internal interpretation at the time.
Yeah, and that interpretation completely changed his confidence, motivation, energy, creativity, everything.
That really drives home how much our internal state dictates the experience.
Yeah.
Maybe more than the external facts.
And the book argues that focusing constantly on problems, dwelling on what's wrong, is a direct route to depression and suffering.
We need to compartmentalize. Avoid over-dramatizing or lumping unrelated issues together.
Right. In this context, the suffering part of negative emotions exists only in your mind, based on that interpretation and focus.
The idea that mental suffering comes from latching onto thoughts, holding onto emotions, that feels very real. The physical pain example is good.
Yeah, the sensation is one thing, but the suffering often comes from that negative internal chatter it kicks off. What if it never goes away? What does this mean?
So relatable.
Yeah.
And procrastination, too. The worry about doing the thing is often worse than actually doing it.
Definitely. It even quotes Dale Carnegie, referencing Dr. Brill, suggesting like 100% of fatigue in sedentary workers comes from psychological or emotional factors, not actual physical work.
100%. That's staggering. Shows how much energy our mental resistance, our suffering consumes.
It does. And this leads the book to a really provocative idea that problems don't objectively exist in the way we usually think.
Okay, unpack that.
Well, it suggests problems only exist when you give them attention. They often live only in the past or future in your mind. And critically, they need to be labeled as a problem to cause that kind of suffering.
The example of losing your legs. The physical fact is there, but the suffering comes from interpreting it as a problem, dwelling on the past loss or future limitations.
Right. If you could somehow accept the new reality instantly without that mental narrative of problem, the suffering aspect wouldn't take hold in the same way.
It's a challenging idea, for sure, but it fits with the overall theme. Interpretation is key.
Definitely. So if much of our emotional suffering is, in this view, self-created through interpretation, through thought, through identifying with our story.
The flip side is empowering. We have agency. We can do things.
Exactly. And the book offers practical tools to influence our emotions, working with both mind and body.
Starting simply with the body, posture and things.
Yeah. Changing your body language, your posture, can directly change how you feel.
The David K. Reynolds story is wild. Deliberately making himself feel depressed by slumping, repeating negative phrases.
It's hopeless. I'm helpless. And the genuine feeling of depression actually followed. It just shows that deep connection.
Often overlooked, isn't it?
Body-mind. Totally. And exercise is another huge one. Studies like James Blumenthal's show regular exercise can be as effective as antidepressants for mild to moderate depression.
That comparison study is compelling. And the long-term effect, too, lower depression scores later for those who kept exercising.
And you don't need to run marathons. Even a brisk 30-minute walk, 5 days a week, boosts mood and longevity. Plus, there's often an immediate lift, right? Within just 5 minutes sometimes.
That's super practical. Okay, beyond the body, using our words.
Yeah, thoughts, words, behaviors are all linked. Using stronger language, like I will instead of I'll try or I hope, subtly builds confidence.
Positive affirmations are mentioned, too.
Right. Stated in the present tense, avoiding negatives, using repetition, visualization, emotion.
Tony Robbins' incantations, adding the body in, makes sense given the body-mind link.
It does. And even just being mindful, like noticing and removing words that signal lack of confidence in your emails or everyday talk can make a difference.
Breathing is another fundamental tool, often ignored.
Absolutely. Proper breathing affects energy, mood. The book notes how slowing your breathing can cut anxiety benefits even at 8 breaths per minute. Dramatic calm closer to 1 per minute.
And faster breathing for energy.
Yeah, techniques like breath of fire for alertness. Simple, but powerful.
Our environment, too, that influences how we feel.
Hugely. People around you, media you watch, your physical space, it all seeps in.
The messy desk example, feeling demotivated, then clearing it gives a boost.
Simple, right? But consciously shaping your environment is a really accessible way to nudge your feelings.
And music. We all know music affects mood, but
the book really digs into it, relaxing, motivating, helping you push through, cultivating gratitude, just getting into a good state. It cites studies, too. Positive music boosts mood, especially if you intend for it to.
And one study found it helped reduce negative mood and boost self-esteem regardless of the genre, even heavy metal.
Apparently. The key seems to be using it intentionally. You can actively condition your mind with music.
Creating playlists for specific moods. Focus, energy, calm.
Yeah, like Christopher Berglund, the athlete, using music for that invincible state of mind. The author uses it for gratitude. It's about experimenting and building your own emotional toolkit.
Okay, so lots of general tools. The book also tackles specific common challenges, like stress and worry.
Right. Stress is framed as interpreting a present situation negatively. Worry is about the past or future.
And stress, the emotional reaction part, is something we can influence through interpretation, taking responsibility for our reaction.
That's the idea. Reframing is key. The traffic jam, it's not inherently stressful. Your interpretation makes it stressful. You could reframe it as normal or, hey, audiobook time.
Makes sense. And worry. Often unnecessary because you can't change the past or perfectly control the future.
Pretty much. The practical tip is to categorize worries. Can I control this? Partly control it. Or no control at all. And then focus on acceptance or what you can influence when you have no control.
What about caring too much what others think? That feels tied to the ego, right? Social comparison.
Deeply. The core insight offered is kind of liberating, though. You are the most important person to you. And guess what? Everyone else feels the exact same way about themselves.
So we massively overestimate how much anyone else is actually thinking about us.
Exactly. They're busy with their own lives, their own worries. It's liberating to realize, for the most part, people do not care about you nearly as much as you imagine.
So trying to be perfect to get approval is pointless.
Exhausting and futile, yeah. You'll never please everyone anyway. Basing your self-worth on their opinions makes you vulnerable. The book suggests the mantra, what people think of you is none of your business.
Your job is just to be authentic, act with good intent.
Right. And practically. Change your interpretation. They don't care that much, so you don't need to stress so much. Maybe think about how often you intensely judge others, probably less than you think. Identifying the image you're protecting helps let go too.
Resentment is another tough one. Anger at others for not meeting our expectations.
Often, yeah. Linked to poor communication or inability to forgive. That Nelson Mandela quote is powerful. Resentment is like drinking poison.
And then hoping it will kill your enemies. Letting it build by replaying things is dangerous.
It's linked to lack of compassion, maybe? Not seeing that people act from their own conditioning. Eckhart Tolle's point about the mind clinging to the known, even if painful.
How to deal with it.
Analyze the event facts versus your story, and often confronting it, talking to the person, or maybe just writing a letter you don't send to process and release it.
Jealousy gets a slightly different take. Not just bad, but maybe a guide.
Yeah, potentially signaling what you really want. Like Susan Cain realizing her jealousy meant she wanted to be a writer. If someone else did it, maybe you can too.
Success is not a limited resource, Zig Ziglar's idea.
Right, but guard against unfair comparison, comparing your B-roll to their highlight reel, or comparing yourself to the combined best bits of 10 different people.
Depression is covered too. Can come from tragedy, but also can be self-created.
That David K. Reynolds experiment suggests it's possible, yeah. The book stresses feelings fluctuate, even in depression. It frames it often as being lost in the mind, in the negative story, disconnected from reality.
An invitation to reconnect with the present, the body. Thinking isn't always the answer.
Often not, in this view. Reconnecting through exercise, meditation, staying active, focusing on others, Alfred Adler's idea via Carnegie. In extreme cases, maybe that story-dropping Eckhart Tolle describes.
Fear is often framed as a signal for growth. Something you should do.
Yeah, often a sign you're pushing boundaries. It exists mostly in the mind, fear of loss, fear of judgment, even fear of success.
Procrastination links in there too, maybe? Fear, self-doubt.
Could be, or lack of self-discipline, letting the mind be the master instead of the tool.
The book outlines the costs, peace of mind, self-esteem, lost dreams. Overcoming it involves rewriting your excuses.
Uncovering and rewriting that story, yeah. Clarifying your why. That deep motivation. It needs systems, discipline, but also self-compassion because motivation wavers. Identifying distractions, staying with the urge, starting small, quick wins. There's a whole process outlined.
And lack of motivation itself.
Often a sign of no compelling vision, no why, or maybe misalignment with your values or strengths. People with strong purpose often work passionately their whole lives. It involves finding your strengths, knowing yourself, clarifying that why, and again, systems, discipline, self-compassion are key. Motivation follows action sometimes, not the other way around.
So much of this seems to come back to some core mindsets. Self-awareness is huge.
Foundational, yeah. The ability to just observe your thoughts, emotions, behaviors without immediately judging or getting swept away.
The above-below-the-line model sounds useful for that. Simple visual.
From Jim Dethmer and Diana Chapman, yeah. Above the line. Open, curious, responsible, below the line. Defensive, closed. Blaming, gossiping.
Just recognizing when you've dropped below the line tells you you're probably reacting from ego or fear.
Exactly. It's a trigger for self-awareness. And the fear versus love model is another lens. Acting out of fear, getting stuff, versus love, giving stuff.
Like the actor wanting fame versus wanting to entertain, noticing your motivation helps you shift it maybe from getting to giving.
That's the idea. It connects to a more fulfilling state, and ultimately it loops back to challenging core beliefs.
Because strong reactions often happen when beliefs are threatened.
Right. So the book encourages asking, what am I protecting here? Can I let go of identifying so hard with this? Who would I be without this belief? Especially when you feel that defensiveness rising.
Which leads us neatly to letting go. The book says this is hard.
It really is. We identify so strongly with our stories or problems, even negative emotions. They become comfortable, familiar, like that not good enough feeling. Who would we be without it? It's a genuine question the mind asks.
But there are simple steps offered to practice it.
Yeah, surprisingly simple in concept. First, observe with the detachment. Get into your body. Feel the physical sensation of the emotion. Realize the thoughts and images are just interpretations, not the emotion itself. Feel it, locate it, but don't engage the story. Don't believe the thoughts it throws up.
Okay, observe, feel, don't engage the story. Step 2.
Label the emotion, but without judgment. Recognize it's temporary, like clothes. Shift from I am angry to I am experiencing anger, or I feel sadness passing through. That creates distance. Remember, if you were your depression, you'd be depressed 24/7. You're the observer, not the state.
Observe, label, and then?
Repeat. Keep observing, keep labeling gently until the feeling starts to shift or fade. The book really encourages just trying it, even with skepticism.
Because emotions, even the tough ones, are fundamentally guides, signals.
That's the final point on this. They signal something needs attention, a change in perspective or action. They get louder if ignored. Learn the message, then practice letting go of the overwhelming story around it.
It's about realizing you're the witness, the consciousness behind the temporary states. That gives you power.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the core message from these Master Your Emotions excerpts seems really empowering, doesn't it?
Yeah. While negative emotions happen, a lot of the suffering isn't inherent. It comes from our interpretation, our thoughts, identifying with the ego's story.
And because we largely create that suffering internally, we actually have significant power to change how we feel. By shifting perspective, challenging stories, using all those practical tools we talked about.
We covered a lot of ground, understanding the wiring, the ego, interpretation versus emotion.
And the tools. Body, words, breathing, environment, music, reframing thoughts, specific strategies for stress, worry, resentment, procrastination.
All built on self-awareness and that simple practice of observing and labeling to let go.
It keeps coming back to being the witness, distinct from the mental chatter and emotional waves. Thanks for bringing these sources in. It was a really rich exploration.
Agreed. Genuinely practical insights here. Okay, final thought for you to ponder.
Lay it on us.
If you aren't your emotions, and they really are temporary experiences like clothes you wear, what freedom does that truly give you to choose who you want to be and how you want to respond in any given moment?